All right, everybody, here we go with the notes for Chapter 11, talking about writing for the ear. We're going to spend this chapter talking about tips and tricks about thinking about what it means to put a message together that is meant to be spoken and is meant for someone to hear what is being said. In audio, your ears become your eyes. Broadcast copy is more than simply words that are easy to read. It's a type of communication that packs sight, sound, and emotion into words that are heard and not seen. Writing for the ear involves packing words and phrases with the elements missing from the visual world. Basically, what we're trying to do is, just with the spoken voice, we're painting a picture in the mind of the listener. And the better we are at crafting those words and the way that we put those words together and the way that we speak those words, the more that we're going to be able to control some of the intricacies of the picture that is painted in the mind of the listener. Radio copy is among the most persuasive and powerful of all methods of communication because, in a way, it's the most personal. It's a one-to-one transaction between you and the listener. We talk a lot about the idea of when you're behind the microphone and you're using your voice to reach out to an audience. It's better to actually think of yourself in terms of talking to one particular person. Don't treat it like you're on a stage and you're speaking to a crowd. That kind of gets lost when you're talking about this sort of medium. It's much better to try to take that one-on-one personal approach. Think of the one particular person that needs to hear what it is that you're saying and go along in that context as you do a vocal performance. And before you get to doing that vocal performance, you have to start with the script and write in that sort of way. So now let's take a look at 10 basic word and sentence techniques for writing for the ear. First off, appeal to many senses. You need to mention sounds that can't be heard because they're off microphone or they weren't recorded. You have to think about colors that can't be seen. Some cases, you have to use tactile cues and sharp smells. So you want to use rather descriptive language that talks about not just the fact that a sound is being put out there, but what does that sound like? How loud or soft is it? How far away is it? Is it more of a shrill sort of sound? Is it a deep bass? As descriptive as you can, think about the way that those sounds appear. Also, think about the way that you describe the smell, the aroma of something. If it's food, talk about how it tastes, not just that it tastes good or bad, but what particular qualities about the taste of the thing you're describing. Is it decadent? Is it salty? Is it bitter? How bitter is it? How salty is it? Be as descriptive and as much as is possible when you're using your words in that sort of way. Keep your writing clear. Write short, declarative sentences that are not subject to misinterpretation. This almost seems to go counter against the first argument that we made. But at the same time, while we want to be as descriptive as we possibly can, we also want to keep things in nice chunks because it's much easier for someone that's listening to be able to get pieces of information one bite at a time. So if you go on using lofty words, 50-cent words, if you will, or if you put together long run-on sentences, it's going to be a lot easier to lose your audience. Thirdly, keep your writing conversational. It must mimic normal speech patterns. So think about the way that you would talk with someone, if you meet them in the hall and you're just hanging out, or you're talking to somebody on the phone. Use the same sort of language, use the same sort of speaking styles. Don't be stilted. Don't be an orator like you're giving a speech or something like that. Really just try to be casual for the most part. Think about the way that you speak in everyday language and do your best to mimic that. Fourth, sentences should be short. We just kind of talked about that. Being conversational, being to the point as much as you possibly can. Fifth, be specific. Put necessary details into the copy. So if it's important that something is tall or something is red or something, there's a specific date or time or something like that, do as much as you can to make sure that you get all the details that are necessary correct and get those out when you're putting copy together. Sixth, show, don't tell. Choose words that show an action. And what we're talking about here is trying to use words that are much more active. And actually, if you can use words that are more present tense to make it feel like things are happening right here, right now. The better that you're able to do that, the more the copy is going to come to life, and the easier it's going to be for the listener to paint the picture in their mind of what it is that you're trying to say. Seventh, use pronouns carefully. If you must use pronouns, be sure that there's no risk that the listener won't know to whom or what the pronouns refer. A good example of this might be if you're talking about two women and you use the word she in the context of talking about these two women. Make sure it is absolutely clear which particular woman you are referring to, so that the word she doesn't become ambiguous and it's unclear as to which person it is she referenced to. Avoid adverbs. Adverbs are words that describe actions. It's much better to show the action. So think more concretely if you can, as opposed to abstractly, if that makes sense. You want as much as possible, again, to try to control the picture that's being painted in the mind of the listener. Active words do a lot better at that. Ninth, use active voice. Active voice means that the subject of the sentence performs the action indicated by the verb. So again, it's making things feel like they're happening right here, right now. It's also a good idea to stick with subject, verb, object construction for most of your sentences. This is the very basic sentence structure that we learned in first and second grade. Noun, verb, and then descriptive words after that, or the object of whatever is happening in an action near the end. Those sorts of ideas, because it's very easy to follow that sentence structure. And then seventh, use strong active verbs. So you see a theme that's going on here when we talk about these sort of things. You want to keep things in the present. You want to keep things in the here and now. You want to make things feel like they're happening at the very instant that you're hearing them. And it's much easier for the listener to follow along with all of those ideas. Now, let's move on to 10 basic paragraph and overall story construction techniques for writing for the ear. First off, be sure the short sentences in your paragraphs carry the weight. Your points and punchlines should be short. Again, we don't need to go on with long descriptive sentences that makes it easy for a listener to get lost in what it is that you're trying to say. So while you want your sentences to be short, you want to pack them with as much meaning as you possibly can. Second, end at the beginning. Now, we talk about how a story tends to have a structure of a beginning, a middle, and an end. Well, in a news story or a commercial, your listener is going to be more satisfied if the end makes some reference to the beginning. The piece then will seem like a unified whole. So almost kind of think about it in terms of coming around full circle. So you put the premise out there at the beginning and you come back to that premise by the time that you finish up. So actually, what they tend to look at here when we talk about writing for the ear is starting in the middle and ending at the beginning. What does that mean? It means start at the point of conflict. So start off with describing what the problem or the issue or the situation is. What's the thing that is going to have to change during the course of what it is that you're talking about? Then go back to the beginning. Provide background of what led to the particular situation that is being described here. And then provide the resolution and refer to the beginning as you do so. So as you're putting this together, and think about this again, the fact that you're talking to somebody and they're listening to what it is that you're saying, as opposed to having the opportunity to see visual pictures in front of them like you do in television or video, or having the text in front of them like in a book or an article. You're using your voice to convey all of this information. So you think about how you grab the listener's attention and you make the story come to life. This is the idea of creating an interrupt, piquing someone's interest to what they hear, and as a result, the listener says, "Ooh, that's interesting, that's intriguing, that's important. I'll stick around to hear more of what's happening." And the way to do that is to start with that conflict point, or the point of issue, point of situation, and then go back to the beginning, the background, if you need to, and come up with the resolution in the course of that conversation. Thirdly, think in terms of threes. The rhythm of three examples or three statements is compelling for one to receive a message. Boom, boom, boom. It's just kind of a mental thing that we're conditioned to. So if you're able to do that in your writing and therefore in your explaining, you're going to have a much better effect in capturing the listener's attention and having them retain what it is that you're saying. Think in terms of threes. Fourth, ask questions. We're accustomed to giving attention to questions. It piques our curiosity. It makes us think about what the answer might be or want to learn what an answer to a question might be. So as much as possible, ask questions. Fifth, vary your sentence length and style. Short declarative sentences are best, but several strung together can become boring or hard to listen to. You can kind of think of it this way. Short sentences, if you have one right after another, we tend to kind of think of that more in terms of a list structure. And many times, unless the list is really important to us, we tend to tune out of all the items in a list. Or we might miss a couple of important items within that list. So if you vary up your style of delivery, if you vary up the length of the sentences, you've got a better chance of, number one, allowing your conversation to be a little more descriptive. And in the course of that, it's also going to provide enough variety to pique and continue to keep the interest of the listener. Sixth, focus on the listener. Remember, you're writing a one-to-one conversation. Don't be afraid to use the second person pronoun. Talk in terms of you. You know what's going on in our world today. You're a smart person. You can provide a benefit to this situation, or you can receive a benefit in this particular way. When we talk about you, especially when we're talking to one person, it makes the person listening feel like they're important, they're significant, that the conversation actually has some sort of impact on them. Focus on the listener. Next, avoid cliches. Hackneyed, trite expressions make communication seem stiff and amateurish, so you really want to try to avoid them if you can. Now, cliches are memorable many a times, but they can also be hokey. So it can take away from the credibility of what it is that you're trying to say. So unless there is a strong, compelling reason to use a cliche, another cliche here, think outside the box. Get away from cliches and come up with your own ways of saying things that are going to be memorable and profound and significant. Next, use humor when appropriate, but be careful when you do so. Humor and irony add interest to just about any sort of communication, but nothing falls as flat as inappropriate humor. So you really need to know your audience here. You need to know what sort of things that they're going to find funny and memorable, and what sort of humor they're going to appreciate. And if you have something that's kind of timeless, you also want to keep in mind that the way that the public perceives humor over time changes. So you could wind up dating yourself if you use humor that's maybe more specific to the here and now. And if it's something that you're creating that is not meant to be timeless, then that's not as big of a deal. But even so, you do want to keep in mind who your audience is, what they expect to hear, what they might think is funny. And also, don't force yourself to be funny if you're not, because that can also create a situation where, your message effectiveness just goes down the drain. Next, make use of imagery when appropriate. Try to use wording that helps colorize the image created in a listener's mind that gives the message a certain connotation. Be descriptive, but when you're being descriptive, don't use a whole lot of words. Don't be verbose. You want to use words that are going to get right to the point of making that certain image really come to life, to colorize certain things, if you will. And then finally, make sure your piece has one overall point. Especially when we're talking about commercial production, you don't want to give a bullet list of things that you're trying to convey to an audience member. Try to keep things to just one main idea. That's the KISS principle. Keep it simply simple. Reinforce that one overall point throughout your piece. So make all the descriptions, make all the arguments that you're making within a production somehow go back to that one main idea. So that one main idea gets reinforced over and over and over, and that one thing you're trying to convey to the audience winds up actually resonating with and being held by the audience member. So that's going to do it. That's chapter 11. Finish up the notes and the study questions. Make sure you check out the survey on Blackboard. Fill in some feedback, things that you found were significant, profound, things that you have questions or issues or concerns about. We'll talk about all those things when we get together for class.